So, next month, I'm going to turn 30. So when the TEDxTrastevere team invited me here, I thought, fantastic, I can have my turning 30 crisis in public. But no, I'm too tired to have a crisis after, having just finished my first feature-length film, which is Simshar, which the presenters spoke about briefly. But what this benchmark birthday has done for me is it's made me reflect on my journey to making the film so far, especially in the context of being part of Generation Y, which is my generation, which is increasingly being described and defined as disillusioned in the wake of the global recession. Now, when I was growing up in Malta, which you can barely see there between Sicily and Libya, these are mostly going to be stills from the film. We had Italian television, for better and for worse, and we had American movies. And then we also had big international films which came to film on the island, but there was no such thing as a Maltese film body, no such thing as an indigenous Maltese film industry. And yet, this is what I wanted to do. And having been brought up, like many of my generation, to believe that with hard work and perseverance, you can achieve your goals, I just went for it. After spending 7 years working, training in film schools and on film sets, I thought, okay, I'm ready to make my first feature-length film rather than a short. But I knew how tough the competition was out there, and I knew that to start off, what I needed was a really good story. And that story came when I met Simon Bugeja in the Christmas of 2008. Now, 4 months earlier, Simon was involved in one of the biggest tragedies in Maltese maritime history, when an accident on his fishing boat called Simshar left himself, his father, Cremona, his 11-year-old son, Theo, a Somali migrant worker, and a friend stranded in open water. 7 days later, Simon was found floating on a polystyrene raft by his fellow fishermen, and he was the only survivor. Now, when I met Simon, he had gone from being a national tragic hero to a manslaughter suspect. And his account of survival and what happened between those people on that raft during those 7 days was extremely compelling. But I still felt that it made for a better documentary than a feature film. So I packed up my recorder and I was on my way out. And almost to myself, I said, the Mediterranean is not a very big sea. It's amazing that nobody saw you in those 7 days. Because I assumed that since they weren't picked up, they weren't seen. To which Simon said, as though it was the most obvious thing, he told me, we were seen, but we were left behind because they must have thought that we are irregular migrants stranded in water. This happens all the time. Now, in 2008, irregular migration from Africa to Europe was common, but it was not in the public eye the way it is today, especially in the light of the most recent tragedies in Lampedusa and Malta over the past 2 weeks. So I wanted to investigate this claim further, and I spoke to captains of trawlers, to other fishermen, to private boat owners, and to my surprise, most of them had stories of how they had either seen migrants stranded and left them, or how if they would see migrants, they would leave them. And they had a whole list of reasons, And that's when I noticed that this once cardinal rule and law of saving people in distress at sea was no longer cardinal. And this, cradle of civilization and of life, the Mediterranean Sea, had become a mass grave. And there was a truth out there just all around us. And we weren't, it wasn't in the open. So I thought, how interesting that this complex political issue has affected Simon, his family, and his crew in such a personal way. Interesting, of course, from a story point of view. And that's where I felt I had my story, and that I had a story that I felt was important to tell, and a story which I wanted to become my first film, which is Simshar. Now, although thematically and character-wise this was interesting territory, when it comes to logistics, it was a nightmare. We had, they say, to keep your sanity, you should not work in water, you should not have child actors, and you should not have animals. And sometimes we had all of these three together with fire. We also had crowds, multiple boats, and an ensemble cast, which made it very hard to cut costs. Now, in Europe, filmmaking is somewhat of an endangered species, and it's only possible thanks to a combination of EU grants, state aid, incentives from investors, and a couple of studios. And at the time, none of these were available to a Maltese filmmaker because a Maltese filmmaker didn't really exist. And I thought, but I knew this. This I knew, but I also knew that if I got a company from 2 countries which were eligible for these grants and incentives, meaning 2 companies, one from each country, to collaborate with my company, then the film would become eligible for incentives. What I didn't know was that when I did that, it was still going to be impossible to make the film, because film, like most sectors at the moment, is suffering under the pressure of the economic crisis, because investors are shying away, arts funds in every country are being slashed. And to compound on this, it's an industry and an art form which is in great flux because there is the digital revolution, and also illegal downloads, which I'm sure some of you over here do, and hopefully when you see how hard it is for us to make films, you won't. So, luckily, at this time, the Malta Film Fund was just being set up, and what they were offering was a maximum of 15,000 euros for the development of feature films. Now, that's a lot of money, but not when the first estimate of your film is at 3.5 million euros. So what we thought was, let's apply for this money, and out of this money, let's try to make the best package we possibly can, so that we can, we can back up our story, and we can go back and we can go back knocking on that door of the film industry and try again, although time and time again they have said, oh, this is such a good story, if only it were a few years ago, if only it were a few years ago. And I was just thinking, but it's now, so what, we're just going to be disillusioned and give up? So we made mood boards and documents, and we made a teaser trailer. And then what happened was, one of my colleagues put the teaser trailer on Vimeo, and the next thing I know, I get a phone call asking me where tickets could be bought, and then I got another phone call, and another phone call, and another phone call, and then I got a phone call from the press telling me, oh, can we have an interview with you because this trailer has gone viral. And then I just thought to myself, instead of wasting all my energy knocking on a door where, there's an industry that is not open to me, why don't I just look at all the people who are outside that door, who are outside the door with me, and work together so that maybe we can get in through the window. And so what we did was, there are a lot of people who worked on the Troys, the Gladiators, on all the films that came to Malta, but were never heads of their department. So there was a human resource that was just as hungry as I was. And then there were a lot of other filmmakers, visual effects artists, and who were just like who I had met when I was studying and working all over the world, who were trying to break through as well. And thanks to the digital revolution, because it definitely has its pros as well, we were able to work remotely with Croatia and Dublin and the US. And then there were also all these companies which aren't usually associated with film, which because of the economic crisis in a way, were able and willing to collaborate with us too. And then the film fund, seeing that something was happening, continued growing with us and opened its door for the production and not only the development of feature films. And then because we got so big that we were then eligible for incentives which foreign films coming to Malta have, and we got them too. And this is how we made the film. Can we play? This is going to be a bit of behind the scenes, just of the first leg of the shoot. But this is how we made the film. And then I thought, there are so many people right now who are disillusioned because there is a system that they've been working and studying all their lives to get towards, or have been working within, and it's crumbling, and it's shrinking, and it's not letting us in, or it's spitting us out. And then maybe, we're taught a lot to look at the digital possibilities, but sometimes I think we forget to look around us at the resources that are around us in other people. And I think that there are so many possibilities, and some of the nicest examples I've come across of this way of thinking, of looking at the resources which are the human resources around us, is in the town of Riace in Italy, where they had a dwindling population, empty houses, a school which was going to close down, traditions which were being lost. They actually got a migrant community whose children went to the school, and the school didn't close down, who inhabited the houses, who learned the traditions, and in exchange, their town is not dying. They get a subsidy from the government. They get employment because of this whole infrastructure. Another really nice example is the Geyser Project in New York, where older women who are retired and lonely decided to set up a granny nanny team, and young families who cannot afford daycare but need to work, pay $10 a month, and they get a roster of grannies. So the grannies aren't lonely, and they get some extra money, and the young families, can go to work and survive. And another similar project, in the sense that it works with children and the elderly, is called Age Exchange in London, where they pair up old people with young children, and old people recount their memories, in order to prevent memory loss and for the children to be exposed to history in an interesting way. And a more maybe mainstream example of this is Airbnb, where there are people who need accommodation for cheap, and there are others who are going to be away from home, and they don't want, that's a resource that's going to waste. And also in countries where there are quarries, and the quarries are extinct, and those countries tend to be quite arid, and they need public green space, and so the quarries are reclaimed and turned into green space. And I think what's particularly nice about these examples is how, instead of being disillusioned with the challenges that we are facing in the world today, they get two problems and they juxtapose them onto each other to create a solution. And I find that extremely inspiring, and I hope you do too. Thank you.